Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'll be interviewing my friend Alex, who is a grip. For anyone that is new here, welcome to my channel where you learn how to get connected and thrive in the film industry. Towards the end of our conversation, Alex and I talked about the challenges that come with the lifestyle of having a career in film, so be sure to stay tuned for that.
My name's Alex Calderon. I'm a grip. That involves lighting, lighting the sets, cutting the shadows, making sure everything looks decent.
Awesome. And I know that there's a common stigma that grips and electrics hate of like it's easy to confuse the two sometimes. So can you go ahead and explain the differentiation of both, in the job and the appearance of what you may have on your tool belt?
Okay. Yeah, with grip and electric, they're kind of like the same general idea, but different functions of it. So they're both focused on lighting. The electricians usually bring the lights, and the grips will come in and cut the light and shape it. So the electricians come in, they have an idea of what with the DP have an idea of what the scene should look like. So they'll come in with lights for daylight or nighttime, whichever one the scene calls for. And then the grips will have flags and gels to help color the light to make it more orange for daytime, more blue for nighttime, if that's what they're wanting. They also have flags to help cut the light, so everything's not one big washed out, flat looking image. You'll be able to, keep the light on the actors who are in the scene and cut it from the back, or have little specialty flags to help highlight key items or different things in the background.
Yeah, just looking at, the truck and what's on, y'all's two tool belts, like, is there like certain tools that grips really use over electricians that's like just easy to identify? Because I know I have a difficult time with that, so I'm sure I'm not alone.
On the tool belt for the grip and electrician, they're usually pretty similar. Depending on who you're working with, you'll be able to tell some grips by wearing a hammer. Usually you don't have to do that anymore, depending on the key and who the grip is, how old school they are. They'll keep a hammer. Usually most of the people I've worked with say it's not necessary to have a hammer. You aren't going to need to wear it all the time. It's better to have less stuff on you and be able to move through set without knocking something over than have a hammer that all of a sudden you bump into, or someone's behind you and you don't know, and you're there knocking them over with it. Electricians will have usually the gap press light meter. They'll have a power meter, so they can check a box, make sure it's working right. If there's an issue when someone plugs something into the electrical box, they'll make sure the right voltage is coming out. Hopefully none of the cables, none of the stingers are wired wrong. I was on a commercial yesterday where they had an open neutral, and luckily they found it before anything, before it got sent up in the air and became a big pain in the butt to fix.
Yeah. So with that, as a grip, what are like your must-haves on a tool belt?
So for a grip, the main things you want to have are a C-wrench, a tape measure, a screwdriver, and a set of gloves. Then if you're working on set, depending on the key, they'll want you to have like a piece of black wrap in case you have to cover a light real quick to keep the spill from hitting a wall or something. On the electricians, usually they'll have the same basic thing, but their gloves will be thicker, something that'll be able to stand up to the heat in case they have to move a light, because as you know, I don't know who's watching the channel, but the lights will get very hot. So you don't want thin gloves when you try to mess with them.
Yeah, and for, gloves for grips, is there any sort of, special features they should have, like more rubber or, like you said, standing up to heat or electricity, or, what are kind of the features of gloves they should be looking for?
Usually for a grip, it's just all a matter of preference. I found that for me, the smaller rubber covered gloves work better because they're so thin you can still tie knots and do small, minute tasks, whereas a leather glove, you're going to have to take them off if you're trying to do something in tight quarters or trying to tie knots in rope or something. For the electricians, usually they have what's called Setwear gloves. I'm not sure if there's other brands of them or not, but those are the ones I knew from 10 years ago when I was still working as an electrician, and the ones you usually see. I think it's like 2 or 3 layers of thick leather, and they're heavy enough where you can actually grab a light that's been burning for a couple hours and be able to mess with it for, a couple minutes before you start to feel the heat and have to put it down. Yeah, so in the grip department and electrical department, you usually have the set grips, and on the electrical department, they'll either call them the set lighting or set electricians. And those are the ones who are usually there with the crew as the film is being shot, or TV show or commercial. They're there as things are getting shot, and they'll do, the more fine tuning of the lighting. On TV and movies, on bigger shows, you have what's called the rigging crew, or the pre-rigging crew, for both electricians and grips. They're the ones who'll come in and take care of anything that'll be a bigger issue for the set guys. So they'll come in if you're doing a day for night where you're shooting in the daytime and it's nighttime. They'll tint out the windows and put solids over anything just to make sure the interior looks like it's an actual night. Usually on the electric side, they'll do some pre-lighting. They'll get the bigger lights outside whatever windows they need. They'll run all the power, or most of the power. There might be some fine-tuning of a room that changes, and they'll have to run something from there, but they'll usually run all 4 off. And then once the shooting's done, the rigging crew comes back and we'll pick everything up. Usually whatever they left out, sometimes the set guys, depending on what went on, they'll leave a couple of things behind, and they'll pick those up and make sure the set gets them back.
And can you go ahead and describe what's some common lingo and the type of lighting and equipment that you use?
A lot of grips will call meat axe a 2x6 solid, which is a long, narrow flag that they use usually they'll put it on top of the light to help cut a larger area. Usually they use it for cutting walls and background. And they'll call that a meat axe. But then you go out to California, and a meat axe is this weird multi-armed thing that you put in green beds to help light from there. As far as common terms, everything's kind of weird and different. One grip crew in town calls cheeseburros grenades, and when I was day playing with them, that threw me off, because to me, what I think of grenade is a pipe starter that you use for car rigging or specialty rigging like that, and I'm there looking for 5 minutes trying to find the rigging crate, and they're like, it's right here. I have to tell you, these are what they call grenades.
Yeah, as far as the ones that I'm aware of, because the ones that you mentioned, I've never even heard of, but I've never worked in as a group before. Of C47s, clamps. If you want to go through
Okay.
The different types of lighting, cables, over and under for a cable. I know that was something that I learned early on.
The wrapping?
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about lighting right now, because we're kind of going through an LED revolution. And each time I figure one thing out, there's a whole new light that I've never seen. A couple years ago, I guess, maybe 2 years ago, I was trying to help an electrician because they wanted to add intensity to the light. I was like, oh, I'm right here, I'll do it. And I went to turn the knob, and it was the color temperature knob. I'm like, well, I failed. I hit the wrong thing completely, sorry. Because every month a new company's coming out with a new LED, and it's yeah, it's really evolving really quickly right now.
How interesting. So with that, how do you stay up to date? Is it just, as you're on the job, you just, learn as the technology develops, or do you have any outside resources? Like how do you, you know, make up for that difference as the technology changes?
For me, as a grip, it doesn't matter as much because our job isn't so much messing with the light usually. We still, if it's an LED light, if it's a tungsten or an HMI, we still cut it pretty much the same way. We'll put the flag just to shape it. Or with LEDs, the nice thing is a lot of them now have self colorization. Oh, I think that's the word. So you don't have to gel them as much. You can put in what color temperature you want, and the light automatically changes. I think the Union Hall has classes on the new lights coming out every once in a while, but I think most of it's usually you learn on set.
And can you speak to, the workflow specifically on set? So like I have a guess, but I don't want to say to confuse anyone. Like who's the one that's mainly giving the direction, and what type of direction do they give? And then how do you, facilitate amongst yourselves who's taking over which tasks?
Okay, so usually for the overall direction, the director of photography or cinematographer, I don't know, there's a couple different names, and I've never learned who likes what. To me, it kind of seems like whichever one they want to be called is what they're called. I know if you get into camera, it becomes a bigger issue about what you call them. But they're kind of in charge of camera, the electricians, and the grips. And them and the gaffer together usually come up with the lighting setup. Sometimes they'll have input from the grips, but usually the grips will come in more on how to do the lighting setup than what it should look like. And then within the departments, you have the key grip, who's the head of the grip department, and the gaffer or head lighting technician on the electrician side. And they'll be the ones who tell the thirds, who are usually the guys on set with them, what to do. Depending on who's in charge, depends on how the work will be done. Usually, most key grips I've worked with will say, hey, we need a flag over to this light over here. And who's ever available or closest will say, copy, I got it, and take the stuff they need. Some other key grips who are more anal will say, or if it's a harder light, a harder cut or something more advanced, they'll specifically call out for a special grip that they know that can handle it. Or if it needs to be done really fast, they'll say like, hey, Bob, can you go cut this light and do this with it? Or hang this from the grid. We need to hang a floppy from the grid to cut this light. But for the most part, it's usually pretty open. They just call for what needs to be done, and whoever's available just says, all right, copy that, and goes and does it. There's usually not a, you go do this type of mindset.
So with that, you got to be self-starting and self-initiative. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. If you're starting off, you definitely want to ask a lot of questions. Not to the point where you're annoying and not in the middle of the lighting setup, but during downtime, when you're on set and they're rolling, usually everyone except for the keys stand back and get off set. So that's a good time to be like, hey, how do you guys do this? Or what's this called? If you're just starting off and don't know much, you can be the set guy, or not the set guy, the cart guy. And that's how you learn how everything's organized, what all the small specialty devices are, specialty knickknacks. Because your job will pretty much be to make sure the carts stay clean and organized. And if they call for something and no one's right there, you'll pull it and meet someone halfway usually.
Yeah, like so once they learn the cart, then they know what to grab and can more jump in as things are being called for.
or a big way people in Atlanta got their start was going through the rental houses. And that way you're constantly just pulling the gear every day and putting it back. It's another way to learn gear, and you also get to meet whoever's coming in and get to know some of the bigger keys and gaffers in town.
So that's a great point of, so say someone landed a job at one of those and, there's a crew coming in to, load up their equipment for filming. What's, a conversation or, something that they can say that could get them, potential opportunity? Like, have you ever hired anyone in that type of scenario? I'm curious.
On commercials, when we go there, I'm kind of down on the chain because I'm more on TV. And our rental house is different, or it's usually the owner operator truck who we're working with. Usually it's just, it's kind of they see the same people coming in and you kind of start a conversation, say, hey, how's it going? I'm new. Tell them what you want to be, if you know what you want to be. If you want to work on camera side, don't go to the guys ordering C-stands and all the heavy metal stuff and say, hey, I want to be a camera guy. You'll go to them and say, hey, I'm interested in lighting. I'd like to get into grip or electric. Because when you start off, it's pretty much intertwined. You kind of go back and forth. Because it's both part of the lighting world. And after you've done it for a couple of years, you can decide which one you like more and kind of follow that path. Learning names, learning who does what, just checking with them, make sure they're happy with their gear. If you hear them complain about what they sent out, be like, all right, remember this C-stand's messed up or these things are messed up. Let's try to take these out of rotation.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point of, first establish rapport and learn names is huge. Like in one of the books I was reading, just by learning someone's name and saying it to them, like they automatically, feel a connection because it strikes that little spark for people. So yeah, establishing rapport and learning names, and then like being, making the most of the opportunity of like learning the equipment, figuring out, there's a level of inventory and organization and how to handle the equipment that will, build upon their skills for when they get to, what they ultimately want to do, working in, a TV show, commercials, whatever it is.
Usually the gaffer and the key grip are kind of at the same level. Like they're just different sides of the coin, kind of. So usually the gaffer will help think up the lighting design, and the grips will help figure out how to do it. But usually they're pretty much considered to be at the same hierarchy. And then from the department, on the grip side, you have the key grip, the best boy, and he's in charge of, I forgot to mention him earlier, he'll be in charge of paperwork, making sure they have equipment. If there's additional guys to hire for the day, he's in charge of hiring the guys and pretty much all the behind the scenes stuff. If the lighting setup gets bigger, he'll come and help, but usually he's not on set because he has enough other stuff behind the scenes that he has to deal with. And then the thirds will be whoever's on set. And on the grip side, you also have the dolly grips who stay with camera. Their jobs are to operate the dollies, obviously, and help camera with what they need. If camera's doing a handheld shot, they'll be there to hand them the camera before they take off and take it from them in between cuts so the camera operator doesn't get worn out having to stand there for 10 minutes while the director figures out what they want.
Hey.
Usually it's better than that, but I've been on shows where it's all changing.
Right.
And then on the electric side, you have the gaffer, the key lighting technician who's in charge. Their best boy, who, like the grip best boy, does all the behind the scenes stuff, the paperwork and hiring and equipment and all that stuff. And then the thirds. And depending on the show, usually most bigger shows will have an electrician who's the dimmer op, who all the lights are pretty much, or all the lights that stay on set that don't get added will run to him, and he can control the intensity, I guess color now with LEDs, but he'll be able to control all the lights from where he's at, so you don't have to have someone go up on a ladder and add a double or a single or change the gels on it. If they need to be tweaked, like there's no remote controlled lighting yet, so someone will still have to get up and change that, but the intensity of it he'll be able to take care of. And if there's like a lighting effect, like let's say there's a lightning storm and all the power goes out at once, it'll all be routed to him and he'll have all the lights on control. It'll all turn off at the same time. Or if you need something to flicker, he's usually able to take care of that kind of stuff.
So can you speak to, the physical expectations of, your job, and what are some safety measures to be aware of, especially if you're new? Like, I feel like it's harder to know where to speak up and where that line is and what kind of situations are expected. I know you won't be able to cover all of them. I'm sure there's like a billion different scenarios out there, but if you can just kind of give some broad strokes.
Yeah, the biggest thing is be aware of your surroundings, because being on a film set, things are moving pretty fast. And, you could be standing there waiting for something, and without you realizing it, all of a sudden there's something behind you, whether it's extras or some piece of furniture that needed to be moved or some other equipment, someone places a light or something, just get it out of the way real quick. Just be aware. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of keys aren't asking for their thirds to carry hammers anymore, just because space gets so tight on a set. But if you're working with someone who does want you to have a big bulky tool belt, just be aware that when you do a quick turn, you might have things that are going to sling a couple inches farther from you, and you might knock something off a bookshelf or knock something, and that never looks good. You never want to be the guy that caused a light to break because you weren't paying attention or you were in too big of a rush. Also, on set, you want to be quick, but you never want to run. You want to have like a quick pace to you when you're doing things. If people see you running, they either think something's gone wrong, or that you don't know what's going on. So one of the things is, move quickly, kind of have a fast pace, but you never want to run.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I think for, all departments to make a note of just be aware of, your actions, and and that goes into safety, because if you're running and, the road is slick or whatever, don't put yourself or someone else in danger. I think that's a really great point. And can you speak to, what are the physical, demands? Like, how much are people expected to lift? And, you guys, just from an observer point of view, without being in it, I see you guys, bringing the carts from the truck in the morning, and then, lugging them back at night, and then having to lift, heavy lights. Can you just speak to that a bit?
Yeah. Working in the lighting department, Gripper Electric, it's a very physical job, especially, I'm not sure if it works this much anymore, but when I was starting off, usually getting into lighting, everyone started off in the rigging electric because no one wanted to do it. Because pretty much the majority of your job is laying cable, and I think each strand of 4-aught, it's 100 feet long, and each strand weighs close to 100 pounds. So
I would die.
5 sticks of cable for 100 feet for your 3-aught, or your 2-aughts, your neutral, your ground. 3-aughts, ground and neutral, but 5 sticks, so that's 500 pounds that you're laying out and having to pick up, and that's just for 100-foot run. So imagine having to circle a house and you have to put a splitter box, then you have 5 or 6 runs, and then the actual boxes they go into are also fairly heavy. So on the electric side, you'll have to be in shape. I don't know if as busy as Atlanta is at the moment, as that's where everyone else starts off, but even when you're on set, you'll have big heavy lights like 12Ks and all that, are usually a two-man job to pick them up. And they'll go on high stands, so you have to get them high over your head. On the grip side, most grip equipment's heavy. Like the most abundant thing the grips have are sandbags. And, you know, the lightest ones are used on set, and those are 15 pounds. So you have, you know, 60, 15-pound bags you have to run around set. And then, or if you work outside, you're usually using 35-pound bags to keep stands from falling over. So, you know, if it's windy, you'll throw 3 bags on a stand plus the bags you need for any sort of diffusion or cutters you have. Like you mentioned, moving carts. The carts are always heavy. And you'll have to move those from wherever the truck's parked to set, which is never that close. Even when they're close, it's never that close.
Yeah.
So you definitely have to be in shape, be able to lift heavy, lots of weight, and stay hydrated is one of the things most people forget about. It is a lot of constant moving.
Yeah, I know. Great points for sure. Wow. I mean, I knew it was a lot of heavy lifting, but thinking about, you know, the average weight of each piece of equipment can be around 50 pounds or more. Like that's a lot.
Yeah. Luckily for us, we live in Georgia, which is the busiest town right now for filming. So if you're new trying to get in, I really have no idea how you get in, because there's been lots of times where the locals run out of talent or crew members. Right now, you can pretty much join the local and make a couple calls and get work when things are up and going. When I started about 15 years ago, I was still in college, and I got an internship at a small production house in town that was very well known for through students, because they were one of the few who would actually give you an internship and you'd actually get time on set. And they had a small rental house where you get the basic idea of the equipment, and they'd take you out on different commercials or different projects they had. And they'd usually let have 2 or 3 interns a semester. And that's how I got my foot in the door, because I didn't know anyone. It's one of those businesses where if you don't know anyone, it's real hard to get in. Another thing, surprisingly, which a lot of people might not think is that big of a deal, is if you're going to film school like I did, a lot of the contacts you make in film school will come back and help you farther on. You know, in film school, I'm like, oh, I'm just making movies with my friends and goofing around and making this, and hopefully one day we'll be able to get on an actual show. And now those same people that I was going to school with are producers on shows and, you know, department heads and all this stuff. It's like, wow, this is surprising.
Yeah, a lot can change. You said 15 years. Yeah, a lot can change in 15 years.
Yeah, but that's, like I said, that's how I got my foot in the door, was doing an internship. And from there, I met a couple of local guys who'd hire me on smaller commercials. And I'd also do a lot of independent films, which you don't see so much in Atlanta anymore, just because it's so busy right now. If you see someone doing an indie, you think they're just trying to get free labor. But 15 years ago, working on an indie was about as good as you could get. I mean, there was many shows I did where it's, you know, drive 3 hours away and you'd have a spot on the floor to sleep on, and then you'd work the whole day, and pretty much all they did was have meals for you. And that's another place where you get to meet contacts, because, you know, there's 3 or 4 other people you haven't worked with who you work the whole day, and you guys are all just beat at the end of the day, hanging out, or you fall asleep and do it the next day. And that's another, like I said, that's another place where I met a bunch of people and started getting my foot in the door. That's where I started actually getting to bigger bigger projects like actual TV shows and out of indie stuff.
I have a foot in the indie scene and a foot in the studio scene. And I agree of, the indie scene, we're getting there. But that's also what's exciting is like I see it growing and having like, because it's like you were saying, like 10, 15 years ago, Atlanta was a different scene as far as film goes. And then like the studio and big network started having more projects here, and it just blew up. And then it became harder to crew up for indie projects because of course those are going to pay more. So it's like I get there's a shift that happened, and I think that's what makes it challenging for an independent filmmaker within Georgia right now, is like we're up against Disney and Netflix, and it's like it's hard to compete. So when you do come across an independent project, I would say really do your research on who's involved on it to make sure it's worth your time and the experience. And going back to the safety element of it, I've been on some indie sets that really value safety and put together some really great measures, and others that just don't. And I get we're up against the indie scene is up against not as having as much resources, but between safety, food, and just take care of your crew as best you can, because since you can't always pay as much as you'd like to, those elements really are felt or amplified in the indie scene. So with that, that's why I say really research the people that you're getting involved with, make sure, like you said, they're not being exploited for just free labor, but it's, I think that's also a reason to get crewed up on an indie film of like, oh, this is, oftentimes it's a story that is really important to be told. So it's, you have more skin in the game that way of just like, I'm not going to just be selling my soul over a paycheck sometimes.
People who go out to work on the indies definitely care about the project. It's not just like you said, it's not just a paycheck. It's, oh, let's sing this. No, on an indie, it's like, oh, well, this is a nice story. Or, I'm helping my friend who's been working on this project get their dream shot and off the ground. There's definitely more of a tight-knit family community when you're doing indies than when you're on the bigger shows.
Yeah, and like you were saying earlier, of it led to paid work. So it's like, view it as an opportunity to gain connections as well, which is why I say, research who's on it, because it may be someone that's pretty big that's on an indie, because like you said, it's all about, connections at the end of the day. And I think that's one thing that I have to my benefit as an independent filmmaker. It's like I can, because I have, some good relationships, like my crews, I feel very grateful and solid that I can put together the crews that I can. So yeah, that's just, putting that out there as far as like the indie scene is alive and well in Georgia, and just, some tips on how to navigate that a bit.
The one thing I will say about working in the film industry and business is think about it really hard before you decide to join, because at first it'll be a fun, great experience, but it will wear you out really fast. It's a very physical and mentally demanding job. And after you do it for a while, you can't get out. Like there's a old joke, I don't know if it goes through all departments or not, but in grip and electric world, was a joke that it takes 5 years to get in and then 30 years to get out, because you work really hard to get in and then you burn out and you won't find another job that pays the same amount of money that this does. So no matter what your lifestyle is, you end up living something higher than you should usually. So if you get burnt out and you try to go to another job after this, and you see what most people make compared to what you've been making on the last show, you're like, how can I live off this? just make sure you care about it, because it's a very demanding job. I think we've had conversations about it in the past couple of years ago. It's really hard to make relationships, personal relationships with anyone, because, it's hard for people to understand that you're working 18 hours a day and you aren't just trying to blow them off, or something came up on the weekend when you had a plan to go somewhere and all of a sudden you're having to work, and, things you've been planning for 2 months you can't do because you need to take care of this new issue that showed up. Weather and rain will destroy your weekends more than ever. If you end up on working as a set technician of any type, most of your Fridays will end at 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. So your Saturday's pretty much shot. You have Sunday to try to get any sort of things needed done, groceries or any shopping done. And then you start back Monday at 7 o'clock. So it's a demanding job. You'll get into it. You'll have a great time. Just be careful and think about it before you go all in, because you'll kind of get stuck and then you'll get burnt out.
I try to remind those around me to don't just hop from one show to the other. And before COVID, anyway, the advantage that we did have was there was always work. Like, it used to come in waves, and now it's just always there.
That is one of the, I was going to say that is one of the hard things. It takes a long time to learn that you can turn down work, or at least in Atlanta, you can turn down work because there's a lot of it, and you can say no to something and not fear that you aren't going to work for months afterwards.
Right. Yeah. I think that's, one thing that's nice about the shift that's happening, like with the increase in streaming platforms and original demand for original content, it creates more work opportunities. I think that there's systemic shifts that need to happen to make this a more sustainable long-term career.
Yeah.
And yeah, we all feel it. I've talked to a lot of crew, and it's funny with these, videos, a lot of people have said similar things at the end of just it's hard. It's a hard lifestyle. And with that, your personal life you're not able to show up in your personal life as much as you would like to. And, I think a lot of people can get held up of oh, that's a choice. Don't check your phone. It's that's part of my job to be on call. And even when I set try to, set respectful boundaries of being there for the show. And I think some people do abuse that power a bit of if you're always available and expect someone to always be available for you, then you're not planning your day very well. I think that, there's an element of balance there that is up to the crew to, try and communicate and find that balance. But yeah, I agree. I think that it's starting to get to a breaking point where there has to be some cultural shifts of yes, we have turnarounds, but I'm sorry, there's not enough protection for our personal time. There's just not.
Yeah, I will say not so much for mental downtime, but I have seen a lot of productions since Sarah's untimely death have taken a larger step in safety. I remember a lot of shows, you work 16, 17 hours, get your minimum turnaround, and then have to be back at work the next day. And, the location will be an hour or two away. So each night you maybe get 2 or 3 hours of sleep from having to drive there and back. A lot of shows now do offer to put you up at night. If you're far away or if you're working late hours, they'll give you a hotel somewhere close by so you can rest and not have to worry about falling asleep at the wheel just because you're so worn out or something along those lines. That being said, you're still working crazy hours and you still get worn down, but shows have taken a bigger step on trying to keep their crew safe. also, I haven't seen it as much. I hear stories of back in the heyday of, the 80s and 90s of shows, just running on coke and alcohol and no sleep. And that's how we got the show done. Everyone was, just all geeked out, going nonstop. And from my perspective, and the crews I've worked with, luckily, I haven't seen that be an issue anymore.
Yeah, overall, I would say yes. Every now and then, there'll be a crew member or boss that struggles with some sort of reliance on a substance. Yeah, it doesn't breed. It's really hard to be healthy and take care of yourself with the environment. So yeah, I really want to challenge, studios, producers to, instill a better system of, ensuring the hours are short. It's not just a money exchange. It's a exchange for a human's time, and money is not the only factor. It's like, our personal lives are being sacrificed, family lives, being there for friends, and that adds up over time. But it gets tough to choose between what's your passion and, finding a work-life balance in an environment that's really hard to have that in.
I know when I was starting off, I'd always hear all these stories from older guys. It's not as bad as Atlanta right now because it's the hot spot. But before Atlanta was the hot spot, you hear stories from the guys you were coming up with of, never seeing their kids grow up because they'd be having to work on a movie, in Alabama or New Orleans or somewhere else. So they go, there's rarely anything shooting in Atlanta besides commercials. So you'd have to be out of town for 3 months and come back for, maybe a week or two, and then have to go back out of town again. Something else to consider if you're thinking about joining this as a career, and not in Atlanta and lucky enough to have plenty of work here, which hopefully it stays that way because we all know things can change in an instant.
Yeah.
I remember a couple of years ago, was it South Carolina, North Carolina, passed one of their laws that wasn't film related, but it caused pretty much their whole film industry to shut down overnight. Like they went from having, a fair amount of shows. It wasn't a ton of shows, but it went from having a decent amount of shows to maybe 1 or 2 shows a year within a month span. Everything just pulled out.
Yeah, like a political factor that is involved with keeping the incentive in film work in, because it's beyond the incentive. It's also actors that are standing up for issues that they care about that will say, I'm not going to do a show there because of, the laws in that area. So
another thing from when I was coming up was pretty much we'd call ourselves traveling carnies, or we were a step above carnies because, anyone in the film industry would follow work around. Luckily, not so much now, and hopefully it stays that way in here. But, who knows? Next year, something might happen and everyone's scattered all over the country again, just trying to get from show to show.
And, going back to, the systemic changes, I can't imagine what it's like to have a family in the film industry. I know you just started one, and I'm so happy that, people that are, around our age and our generation are starting to do that. But, even, with my job with art department coordinating, I've known so many coordinators that have left because they became moms and, they just haven't been able to sustain it, especially if both people are in the film industry.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's possible, but, everyone has their own story. I'm not saying it's possible or impossible. You figure it out or you make a different decision.
I was going to say, I know since Carter was born, my focus has changed. I'm not trying to work as much or trying to get us on a bigger show. I'm happy to stay play here and there, just so mostly from what I heard from the guys coming up when I started, I can be here as much as I can for them. And it's not, a phone call at, on his birthday or something like that. Like he actually gets to see me, and we actually have somewhat of a family.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so important. Yeah, with that, a question that I asked in the past that I'm curious about of like, people will get all excited about like the more known projects that we've worked on. But then, one day I was like, I actually don't want to work on a project that I love because I don't want to know how bad it is to work. So can you speak to that a little bit of like, what are some of your more known projects and what are your more favorite projects that you found to be rewarding and where you found like a happy life balance?
It's funny you bring that up because a lot of people brag about working on the Marvel shows. They'll be like, oh, I was on Infinity War and this and that. Some of the people who do that deserve to brag about it, but that was such a massive and long-term show that a lot of people were working on it just in case something happened and weren't doing much. And working on Marvel shows is like that. People will be like, oh, I'm working on this Marvel show. I'm like, oh, have fun. I would much rather work on this cheesy TV show and not have to worry about it. Because just the scale of the thing, the number of people, everything, it's like the stress level involved on working those shows, even at the smallest level, is, build this whole set, put these 300 motors up in a day, get all this done. It'll wear on you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I've heard. I've never worked on Marvel. I've gotten hit up to work on Marvel shows, but yeah, like I've heard that because of just the monstrosity of everything's more crew, the sets, like the amount of, I mean, because they got the money,
Yeah.
And as far as like, with my position of art department coordinator, there's still one art department coordinator. I'm just like, no, thanks.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've worked on one Marvel show, and luckily it was the first one to shoot in town. It was on Ant-Man, and that one was done differently than the rest of them were done. They weren't being as cheap with the budget, and they were letting the departments have what they needed to get the large scale projects done when they needed to do them. Also, it was it wasn't one of the main characters or one of the main movies, so the scale that they were going to, while large by most movie sizes, wasn't a Captain America or an Iron Man movie trying to get shot.
And yeah, I don't think either one of us is trying to say like, oh, Marvel, like don't work for Marvel, but it's like,
not at all. It's definitely a good place to get your foot in the door, if you can, because like I said, like I mentioned, the amount of people they have out there is so huge, and the amount of work they have is you'll get really good at whatever position you get in because you'll be doing that for months on end. Yeah, I remember, I think, they have a huge rigging department for stages and a separate large rigging department for locations, and you have your set guys and second unit and this and that, and I can only imagine what they do for sets and art department because their sets are amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I stress in some of my past videos is to diversify, like your role and your experience on projects really differ based on the studio, based on the budgets. I feel, and then of course your crew, like you're very rarely working with the same crew. You may work with the same person here and there. I don't know how much it's just for you guys. I feel like, for grips and groups of set dressers, like they are able to maintain a team a little bit more. But
yeah, usually, groups like that, grips, electrics, camera department, groups like that will jump from project to project together, which is good and bad. You get, it's good. You keep busy. You get to see the same people. And if everyone clicks, it's great. If there's people who don't click, then you're stuck working with the same guy for years on end.
And, just from a networking perspective of like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. It's like, don't keep relying on the same person to hire you because You don't know what's going to happen in the future.
Yep. Yeah, definitely want to get out there and try to work with as many different crews as you can. It's like you mentioned, you could stay with one crew for years, and then what happens? Something unfortunate happens to the key grip you worked for, and he can't work. So that whole grip crew now is trying to figure out what to do, or they aren't getting jobs. Or it's definitely good to try to get out and work with as many different crews. Not only because you get to diversify who you know, but there's 20 different ways to do the same thing. So if you've only done this one way forever, then you work with a different crew or see this other way that could be simpler or different in some way, and you like that way more. It helps you just get the knowledge you need.
Absolutely. That's a really great point of knowing or being exposed to more ways to do the job will just make you better at your job. And like you were saying earlier of like, depending on where you work, everyone has different terms for things. So it's like the more exposure you have to that, the more you can adapt. And yeah, one of the gentlemen said adaptability is like such a key skill to have in film, because
Yep. There was another one of those cheesy sayings they say in the grip department. It's like, the right way is the boss of the moment's way. There's 100 ways to do it, and it's however he likes it. That's how you want to do it.
Grinds my gears whenever someone says, this ain't my first rodeo, or this is the way it's always done. It's like, great, that's the only way you know.
Yeah. Like, just because this is the one way you've done it forever, it doesn't mean it's the only way it's done.
Yeah, it's like, I may be new, and what's funny is like there'll be people that have been in it for years and years, and like I've only been in it for 10 years, and it's like I've been exposed to so many different ways of doing things. And yeah, there's really no one way. I think that's a really great point to make. And be open to shifting the way you do things, because it's about appeasing or being aligned with how that person above you likes to work, or how the department flows. And it's like, go with the flow. Like, yes, contribute of like, hey, this is the way we've done it in the past, maybe that is the the better way. But yeah, it's like just not letting your ego get in the way of doing the job and getting along with people, I think, is like a big key.
That is definitely a large part of it. Make sure you keep yourself in check. Like you said, don't let your ego, be your downfall, because that is one thing in this business. People say, "Oh, I did this," or "I'm this person," or next thing you know, they don't work for months on end because they just get too full of themselves.
I heard so many warnings during the first part of my career of like, don't do this, don't do that, you'll never work again. And I'm like, that is not true, because people who really have burned a lot of bridges to this day were.
Yeah. Well, one of those things is that you're in a really busy town.
Right. That's true.
If you're in a smaller town, I don't know how true it is, but I still have a feeling that when work's scarce, you piss off the wrong person, you aren't going to work.
Keeping in mind your environment of opportunity. And even in Atlanta, where there is a lot of opportunity, like I'm very careful before I decide to make a decision that has a strong possibility to burn a bridge between someone, because like you said, you cannot bank on the future. You never know what's going to shift.
Yep.
And like you said, someone that, was at one point, 15 years ago, 15 years later, they're a producer. So.
Or the flip side, someone who, 10 years ago was the top department head whoever wanted to work for, does something or isn't able to change with the times, and now they're struggling to have people work for them. Never get comfortable, I guess, is what the saying is. There's always going to be someone who wants it more than you to try to take your spot, and you want to be able to do your job well.
No, I really like that of never be comfortable. Like, I think that can be a tough pill to swallow. But it's, someone else said, like, you're only as good as your last job. Wait before you make a decision that could cost opportunities down the line. All right, awesome. Wow, what a great conversation.